Good afternoon. My name is Todd DeMitchell. I'll be doing the school law seminar. I'm a professor at the university in the education program as well as in justice studies program. This is my specialty, my area of great interest, thing I've studied probably the most. Before I came here, I spent 18 years in the public schools. I've been a substitute teacher, an elementary school teacher, lead teacher, assistant principal, a director of personnel, and a superintendent. Had a lot of chairs, seen a lot of different things. Seen ways in which the law works, ways in which it doesn't work for people. I've seen decisions that were made by educators that were truly dumb, truly dumb. And the first response is, I didn't know I couldn't do that. I didn't know I couldn't do that. So, what we've been doing in the last decade or so is I put on school law seminar. Hour and a half. All we're going to be able to do is just barely touch the law. So my goal is for you to have at least a little bit of an understanding of how the law is there, the law does impact you, and I give you a few concepts to kind of hang on to. I don't have anything memorized with it, so it's all up here, but if you have questions, stop me, ask. Chances are you'll forget by the time I end up in where I'm at. So we'll take it as far as we can with this. The law impacts your work as an educator. No doubt about it. Your daily work in the classroom is impacted by the law. There's a hierarchy of the law. Before we take a look at that, let me give you an example. I cut out clippings. It's not scientific. It's just the way in which, when they strike me, is interesting. I grab them. To try to look at the breadth of the way in which the law impacts educators. Pupil suit says, math class shown porno film. Teacher won't pledge allegiance. Took place here in New Hampshire. Teacher said that she wasn't going to pledge allegiance. The question becomes, does she have to hold the Pledge of Allegiance or not? And we'll come back to that and take a quick look at that. But what's the first word?
Teacher.
Teacher. Teacher. And this is because you are held to a higher standard of conduct than the rest of society. It's called the status of exemplar. It is a real, live concept, and it does weigh heavily on your shoulders. Gay Straight Club wins ruling. A movement towards gay straight alliances. Secondary, this impacts your work in the secondary schools. Originally, Equal Access Act was set up so that religious clubs could meet at school. The students had religious speech. The founders of that didn't think, this is the United States federal law, didn't consider gay straight clubs at that time. So the first part of the law dealt with whether or not you could hold religious clubs in school. And the answer is yes, the Mergens case. No doubt about it. It does not violate deception clause. But the next move dealt with students who wanted to set up gay straight organizations in the secondary schools. And if the Equal Access Act says that students have a right to free speech, they have a right to free speech, then government can't say, well, you can speak on religion, but you can't speak on gay issues. Cape Cod teacher put on leave for starring in porn films. This gets to the exemplar kind of things. A teacher down in Cape Cod had a superintendent was sitting at his desk one day. Some parents came in to see him. They slapped down on his desk 2 porno films that they had. They said, see this? Do you allow this to occur in your school? The superintendent said, what's going on here? Grabbed it, looked at it, goes, oh my. It was one of his teachers who not only starred in it, but the teacher was, it was his production company. We know as teachers that as any occupation, our occupation has more second jobs than any other occupation. This is a more unusual second occupation. So could the person be dismissed for being involved in a legal activity? A legal activity. You look familiar. You know
What?
glasses? Yes.
I just had one of those.
One of those faces, okay, but you just look like one of the students that had one of my earlier classes. Apology to student settles lawsuit over breast size.
What was that story?
Student tried out for the cheerleading squad. Head of the cheerleading squad said to the female student, "No, I'm sorry, we can't let you on the team. We will not allow you to try out." She goes, "Why? I meet all the qualifications, my grades, everything." Cheerleading coach said, "Your breasts are too large. They're too large. They will be distracting." The coach was female. She brought suit. The student brought suit. After this lawsuit was over, who won? The student or the school? The student did. Because it's an unreasonable regulation. It's an unreasonable regulation. It has nothing to do with cheerleading. She won. All she wanted, she didn't want money. All she wanted to be able to do, all she wanted from the beginning was to be able to compete for a cheerleading spot. She didn't ask to get one. She said, all I want to do is compete. Teacher ordered to pay jilted man $4,700 for a $4,700 ring. Doesn't say plumber. It says teacher. Once again, how society has a different viewpoint of who we are, what we do, and what their expectations of us are. I'll do one or two more, then I want to move on. Abortion foes sue for public school access. An anti-abortion group, this took place in California, wanted to be able to come on campus so they could hand out anti-abortion literature. Can they do that?
No,
Why?
because it's, well, I couldn't give the exact legal reason, but it seems like they're pushing their agenda too much within a school district.
Yeah, the reason they couldn't do it is because a school is called a closed forum. It's closed as opposed to an open forum. Schools are set up just like a military base in some ways. In a military base, you have reduced free speech, a lot more so than what schools have. But you set aside classrooms, are set up for as a closed forum. When your students tell you in your classroom, you do something that you teach, it's secondary, right? History, do you have any history people in here? Ah, okay. All sitting together, too, a little protection. And your students say, well, I have the right to free speech in here. I can speak on what I want to speak on. You go, nah, not true, not true. And this is a closed forum. That means that the government space is set aside for the government's actions. And what is the classroom set aside for? What's it set aside for?
Learning.
Learning's too broad. That's not enough. Be more specific with it.
Public education.
Not too broad. Too broad.
Specific subject.
And what do we call that? Curriculum! The curriculum. This is what you're going to be hired to teach is the curriculum. The curriculum is set aside. That's what the classroom is set aside for. Therefore, students do not have the right of free speech where they can insist and assert a right to talk about anything they want to talk about. So that's what happened to the anti-abortion individuals who wanted to be able to come on campus to talk with the students and hand out literature. Said, no, this is a closed forum. School segregates playground to protect boys from the girls. These are some mean-looking girls. I spent a lot of time in the schools, done lots and lots of discipline. Give me a very large male anytime to 2 or 3 really revved up female students. Tough, just tough, really tough. They had to set the girls aside to do a line, put the girls over on this side so they could protect the boys over here. And so, let me see, one last one. Oh, this is teacher suspended, made student lick blackboard. There are good things to do for discipline and there are bad things to do for discipline. This is one of the bad things to do for discipline. Licking the board, having students that, one that I come across recently, students, okay, take the paper and hold it up against the blackboard with your forehead. Students up against the wall. So we need to be kind of really careful about the ways in which we do discipline. So just a real quick look at the many different ways in which the law does come into our classrooms. There is a hierarchy of law, a hierarchy of law. What's the highest law that we have in the United States? U.S. Constitution, U.S. Constitution, federal statutes, state constitution, state statutes, Ed Code regulations, school policies and collective bargaining agreements. I'm sorry, school district policies, collective bargaining agreements. School policies, what's at the bottom of this hierarchy? Classroom rules. Your classrooms are part of this hierarchy that goes all the way to the top. And we know how hierarchy works. When a hierarchy means that that which is above you, you must comport with. Which means all the things that are above you in your classroom that are legal, you have to be consistent with. The decisions that you make have to be consistent. The courts are typically not really good at accepting excuses. I didn't know. I didn't know that I shouldn't beat kids. I didn't know that I'm responsible for the safe acts that go on in the classroom. So we've got this hierarchy. What I'd like for us to do, yeah, Mrs. Smith's very bad day. How many chemistry teachers? Not a single chemistry teacher. Science teachers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Life science, I'm going to assume? Okay. We're going to do Miss Smith. What are the facts of Miss Smith? Basically, don't read it for me. What are the basic facts of Miss Smith? What happens in this case? What are those? Yes.
She's late to school because she forgot to set her clock back from daylight savings time.
Yes.
I think it's the principal or somebody.
Principal.
Yeah, I think it's the principal. He's outside the class.
Stand outside the classroom.
The kids are waiting. She gets there, quick apology. She gets into the class, asks the kids to read their book for the directions for their lab that they're supposed to be doing.
Can you hear?
She needs to set up the lab. Sorry. She needs to set up the lab. So she usually does this beforehand, but because she wasn't there, she wasn't able to do so. So she was setting up the lab while the kids were supposed to be reading their texts. Once she was finished and they were finished, she had them go ahead and do the lab work, and she started planning the classes for the rest of the day. Of course, she would normally tell this one student, Steve, that you have to keep your goggles on. She'd tell everybody and make sure that they were doing that until they couldn't do the lab. But she didn't do that today because she was busy with other things. So the student, Steve, who she constantly has to remind to put his goggles on or keep them on, he got chemicals into his eyes and they were burning. So now the problem is she liable?
That's right. That's the basic facts of this case. She was late to class. She didn't set up her lab stations. She decided to go ahead with the lab. Had them read. At the end, she's got them set up and says, "Are there any questions?" Begin. Turned, walked away, sat down at her desk for about how long? Good 5 minutes or so. Gave no other directions. Never got up, never did a global scan, never walked through, didn't say a word to any of the students. She hears a scream, she turns, she looks, and it's Steve. And Steve quite often doesn't wear his goggles because he doesn't like to get goggle hair. So she always has to remind him. And she always reminds her students. Because what were they working with? What was this chemistry experiment? What did it involve? Caustic chemicals. Is it foreseeable that if students are working with caustic chemicals that they can be injured? Is it foreseeable if they don't wear safety goggles, they can be injured? Yes. She has a lawsuit brought against her. So what I'd like for you to do now, in the scenario, there are a couple of questions. talk to each other. Take a couple minutes, just talk to each other, see if we can work through some of those questions. We don't have a real long period of time, but you do want to take a couple of
Yes,
minutes.
we had a question from others, I don't know if you want to hold off on there.
Ask it.
We, in a couple of our classes, we have student science safety contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is that,
Mhm.
how that's related to.
Okay, how does the question is, when students sign a safety contract, how does that impact this kind of a scenario? It doesn't. It doesn't. All it says is the students now can begin to use the equipment. It does not absolve the teacher of acting as a reasonable, you hear this from me a lot this afternoon, a reasonable and prudent teacher. We have this duty to act as a reasonable and prudent teacher would under the same or similar circumstances. So the fact that they signed it, great, only means they only get to start, that's all. But you have to have that. You cannot allow them to start any of the lab work until they have that done. You just have to say no to that. It doesn't matter if it's chemistry lab, anything where you get a permission slip with it. Did I get your question on that one? Okay, let's take a quick look at these. Did Ms. Smith owe an increased duty to Steve? To answer this question, what's the pre-question? What's implicit in this question? What's implicit in this question?
Did she owe a duty?
Did she owe a duty? You have to answer that before you can answer whether or not she had an increased duty. And the answer,
I'm an audio learner anyways, so.
well, we're going to test that today. I can't put it up there. But you do have this in the handout that you'll get. Oh, could you pass that to me, please? Thank you. Coming through, thank you. Okay, that's what I like. I always like working with teachers, they're prepared. We owe a duty to our students. We owe a duty to our students. There's no doubt about it. It's consistent through the United States. I don't care which state you go to. I don't care what level you teach at. We owe a duty to our students. That duty consists of 4 basic things. It's hard to believe with my handwriting that I was an elementary school teacher who actually taught handwriting. That says adequate supervision. Proper instructions. Properly maintained equipment. You don't have to write it down. You will have this in a handout. Provide warnings. This is the duty that we owe. This is the duty you owe your students every single day. So the question becomes, in this one, is there an increased duty that's owed? That means, is there a foreseeability that the acts that are going on in the school have create an increased risk of harm? Is there an increased risk of harm that is foreseeable?
Yes.
Yes. And what is that increased risk of harm?
Caustic chemicals?
Caustic chemicals. In addition, there is another increase. The duty that's owed to Steve specifically has another element where it is increased. The duty must be increased. And what is that? What fact leads us to that?
The fact that he doesn't wear his goggles.
He doesn't wear his goggles. So she has what's called actual knowledge, in addition to constructive knowledge. She has actual knowledge that Steve, a lot of times, does not wear his goggles. So she knows this, and she knows that this increases the risk of harm to Steve. The duty that she owes him comes up. Now, if you take a look at what's going on, the English teachers and the English teachers in here. Okay, English teachers, so when you're teaching Beowulf, we have Beowulf going. Beowulf in and of itself is not necessarily an increased risk of harm. So while you're talking to your students about Beowulf, as long as they're seated and they're not acting out Beowulf, then chances are that you still owe them a duty of adequate supervision, given the circumstances of the classroom. change the circumstances of the classroom. That duty, it never goes away. It never goes away. It never gets lower than the basic duty you have right, that I have right, so I owe you a duty right now, and here also. It never goes away. But depending on the foreseeability of harm, it can increase. So, does she owe an increased duty to Steve? Yes, without a doubt. And that duty involves not only adequate supervision, proper instructions, properly maintain equipment, and provide warnings of known hazards. Our second question, was Steve's injury foreseeable? Yes. That's why we tell students to wear goggles when they're dealing with caustic chemicals. Would Ms. Smith be liable if she had instructed the students to wear their goggles, and after she checked it, turned away from Steve, he took his goggles off immediately and got the caustic chemicals in his eyes. So, I am now Ms. Smith, I'm not at my desk. I've said to you, my class, put on your goggles. And what should the prudent teacher do? What would the prudent science teacher do in this situation before she said another word? She would look at each student to see, do they have on their goggles? And when she came to Steve, here's Steve. To Steve, look again, check, look again, come back and say, look at Steve one more time, begin. So she's checked. Now what she's done this global scan is look to see. Steve has on his goggles. Looks one more time at Steve because of the increased duty that she owes to Steve. Turns, goes, and it's just like this. He comes over here to see what's going on here. Steve whips off the goggles, fluffs his hair quickly, splashes caustic chemicals into his eyes. Did she act as a reasonable and prudent teacher would under the same similar circumstances? Did she act as a reasonable and prudent teacher would? Yes. Because we do not ensure the safety of students. We do not take every student who comes to school and say, we will ensure that you're never hurt. What would we have to do to ensure that they're never hurt?
Bubble wrap.
Wrap them in bubble wrap. But then you've got a problem. They got to breathe, right? So if you get too big of a straw, you can suck in birds. It's got to be small enough so they don't pass out from a lack of oxygen. So you got to get it just right. So we do not ensure the safety of students. Our duty is to take reasonable steps in light of foreseeable circumstances. Increased risk of harm, increased duty. Yes, ma'am.
The term, I guess, reasonable, when you would be looking at a case like this, seems awfully subjective, so.
Sure it is. It is. What they have, reasonable actually is a legal term. It's a term of art. And what they'll do in a court setting, and you now are the jury here, the judge will instruct you that when you're looking at, let me see Ms. Smith. I don't have any science. Oh, where's a science person? Come on. Be brave. Science person. Science person, Ms. Smith. As we're dealing, Ms. Smith cannot be guilty because this is not a crime. This is a civil action of negligence, a tort of negligence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when you review her acts, you're governed by the reasonable teacher. This reasonable teacher has the normal kinds of intelligence that a science teacher would have the normal kinds of capabilities that a science teacher would have, similar kinds of knowledge. So they create this reasonable person. And guess what happens with the jury? What do they get to do? They'll go back into the jury room and they'll sit around. Here's our jury here. And we'll talk a little bit about it. And we'll spend maybe an hour or 2 hours on it. Bailiff, more coffee, please. Another Danish over here, please. And we'll talk about it. What does Miss Smith have to do? What do you have to do? You are acting like this every single day, every moment of the classroom. You're making decisions. There's only one occupation that makes more important decisions in a day than what you do. What is it?
President.
You'd think so. Yes.
Air traffic
Quite possibly. And prep what?
Air traffic.
Air traffic controller. They're traffic
Fireman.
controllers.
Doctor?
No, not really. They make lots of, and when they're dealing with me, I want them to really make important decisions at that point. But it's the number, it's the sheer number of decisions. Easily 200 a day, easily, like this, all the way through. Yes, sir.
So in this scenario, should Ms. Smith have been more diligent about writing things down? And, I guess notating that Steve, what was his name?
Mhm.
Steve had not been a particularly safe student. Would that help her at all? I mean,
Not much, not much. Well, the only way it'll help her is if she has these notes and she gives them to a particular person, and who is that particular person?
Steve's parents.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
The lawyer?
The lawyer, no. You involve the lawyer after the problems occurred.
Administration advisor?
Well, yeah, not bad, not bad.
Steve?
Make sure she puts on the goggles so we can read it first.
Yeah.
Substitute teacher. The substitute teacher is who you leave the note for. Because a substitute teacher is your proxy. That person acts in your stead. And if you have knowledge about a student that increases the duty that's owed, and you do not tell your substitute, it's always possible that you did not act as a reasonable, prudent teacher would under the same or similar circumstances. Yes,
So you could be liable if a substitute did something?
there's always the possibility. If you know that Steve has this propensity and this proclivity to not wear his goggles when we're doing certain things, when we're working with dangerous chemicals. And with a reasonable, remember, this jury's up there, they get to think about it and say, how would the reasonable person have acted? They get to think about it, talk about it, and come to a decision. We don't have that luxury. We've got to build schema in the ways in which we approach the things that we do. So if you've got a student who is, and this is a former principal and superintendent, this is what I tell my teachers. If you have a student who has a known proclivity for a dangerous act, you need to put it in your lesson plans. You need to put it so in your substitute folder book so that teacher knows. Because you may not get sued. But if you have my luck, you're going to be sued. And one of my teachers got moved from one school to my school, and basically because she sued her whole school. Her child got injured, went to the school, her child got injured at lunchtime, so she sued, named all the people who were out there, superintendent, principal, assistant principal, all of the new duty supervisors, and 30 unnamed John and Jane Does. That's just in case somebody happened to walk by. They happened to walk by. You may win. You may win. My belief is we need to be as prudent as we can. I'm not an attorney. I'm an educator. My wife is an attorney, school law attorney. She always likes it when I come home and we talk about how the day went. I say, I was quite clear, I'm not giving legal advice, I give educational advice. I give educational advice, not legal advice, but it's prudent to do it, prudent to do it. When you have foreseeability, take the extra step, take the extra step. Because the question is, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do that? Okay. Other questions before we, okay, so we have the,
Wait, I want,
yes?
this isn't secondary school, but do professors of the college teachers have duties owed to their students besides
Yes.
like proper instructions?
We owe,
I mean,
we owe
do you
these.
owe them adequate supervision?
Yes, when we're in a supervisory mode. And here, just in this class right now, I owe you adequate supervision. If I set up things in this classroom that have a foreseeable increased risk of harm, and one of you gets injured, I can be sued. Exactly
It's
right.
like a straight up lecture.
Yeah, straight up lecture, but let's say I have something here, and there's, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 students. I only have 4 of these, but you need it for the examination. The first 4 who get up here get it. And I step aside. Did I act as a reasonable, prudent teacher would, under the same or similar circumstances? Did I provide adequate supervision in there as to how to get to this material, or did I act unreasonably? Act unreasonably. Most professors don't know this stuff. honest with you, most don't. The ones that do are typically in the sciences.
I would think most students wouldn't think so either,
Well, think
like about the adequate supervision.
properly maintained equipment. I take a look at this chair, and I see this chair is ready to fall apart. It's ready to fall. It's ready to fall. Your name is Steve.
What is it?
David, David, grab a chair. No, please. But if I know that there's a dangerous situation in my classroom, doesn't matter if it's my college classroom or it's your classroom, and I leave it there unattended, unwarned, I don't have to fix it, but I've got to do something with it. So it's foreseeable. It's foreseeable. If we have a broken chair, can somebody be injured by sitting in that broken chair?
There's a broken chair in my classroom, there's a sign on it that says broken.
Okay, and where is the chair though, in the classroom? Where do you have it?
It's like, yeah, it's by the door, I think.
By the door, okay? Is it put in a spot
It's like-
where students typically would not sit in it?
Conspicuously placed, yes.
Okay. Then that's probably, when we do not ensure the safety of students, we act reasonably in light of foreseeable dangers. With, she took the goggles off, so because we do not ensure the safety, I have to, going back to number 3, like I looked, I was doing my supervision, I turned, I walked away. Of course, we sort of have the spontaneous, unanticipated act, even though I have foreseeability that he does this quite often. I do not have to stay with him the whole time. If I have to do that, then my supervision has to elevate to where I remove him from those things. I have to remove him from those things. Yes?
How do you prove that?
How to prove
I mean-
what?
So if it's this scenario and you looked at him a couple times, double checked, and then you walked away and he got hurt,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it kind of your word against his?
That's
And,
right.
I mean,
And
there's
who else?
Students.
That's correct.
And the students. The other thing that really helps her, this helped Mrs. Smith until she no longer did. You own one thing, and you're starting to own it right now. You're responsible for this. You are responsible. And that's who you are as a professional. When you build in your classrooms that you're setting, good decision-making, things that are reasonable, aimed at protecting students in light of foreseeable circumstances, and you consistently act in a professional manner, people then see you in that manner. If the idea is that I can do anything I want, I'm a teacher, I can do anything I want, I can treat my students any way I want. And then those are the problems that come up. Those are the problems. So yeah, they would be my testimony as well as the student's testimony. And then also say, does she normally do this? Does Ms. Smith normally look at the students? And she says, yes, this is what I did, because this is what I normally do. You don't have to videotape yourself. It's not a good idea.
Yeah,
But do-
let's
but-
take that back.
But in the back, you want to be able to take notes, though. If things are going on, and you need to note to yourself, jot the note down. Okay, so we've got, the goggles. The textbook provides a warning about wearing goggles. Is that sufficient to relieve Ms. Smith of liability? Textbook says, wear goggles. That's not. This says pull. Okay, pull. I'm going to go outside. I'll be right back. It's stuck. Stuck. Oh. How many times do we see things that are written that we don't do? How many times do we see things that are written that we do not do? But yet, we'll put our professional life out there and say, because the student is supposed to write, they should know it. This is what it's. My wallet. Keep it in my front pocket. There's nobody who protects this better than myself and Terry. Nobody in the world. So why would I take my professional life and the ways in which I act there and do this? And then walk away. If I don't do the things that are going to protect my livelihood also, nobody else is going to do this for you. There is nobody else out there to take you by the hand, and to make sure you're doing every single thing right all the time. Scheme of the ways in which we think about things. Okay, let's see if we want to do anything else with this one. Questions about, it's called tort liability and tort of negligence. Questions about liability in your classroom. I always start with this one because this is the one, you can make a mistake on a lesson and you can overcome it. You make a mistake and a child is injured. That's hard. That's hard. Questions about it?
What about field trips? Are there any other laws that apply? to field
Exact same laws apply, exact same laws apply with it. When I was a teacher, I didn't like field trips. When I was a principal, I hated them. When I was a superintendent, I detested them because they're out. We can't control the environment as well as what we do in the school. So if you're out, let's say you're taking them to Washington, D.C. Is there any foreseeability of additional harm by this trip to Washington, D.C.? And what would some of that be? Car accident, that's one.
Sneaking out.
Sneaking out, yeah.
Drinking and
Drinking,
drugs
yeah.
and sex acts in hotels.
Yeah. All of those things
Attacks.
All of those things. are foreseeable. We see them happen. I got a phone call from a reporter, not sure which state was that one. That was one of the I states, I can't remember, Indiana, Iowa, something like that, Illinois, something like that. And they called and said that a school had a field trip, an overnight field trip. And what happened is that the adults didn't do any checks, didn't do a bed check in the evening, didn't check on the students. And the teacher went out drinking with the parents. And they had my luck. The child got injured. So they called me to just get some background information on whether or not the school and the people involved would be liable. What do you think? Is it foreseeable, would a reasonable and prudent teacher on an overnight field trip with students, if these students were 13, 14, is it conceivable they would be, that they may be out of their room, they may drink, or they may do other kinds of things? Yes. So the duty that's owed goes up. Yes?
Do chaperones owe the same duty?
You know, chaperones will have a different duty, but what it does, it increases your duty. Not only your duty, but if I'm your principal, my principal's duty, because I need to be working with the chaperones so I'm clear as to what, so they know what their duties are, what things that are expected of them. I have to do those things. And then it's a teacher or teachers, if you're going and you've got 20, 30 kids and you've got one teacher, you've got a disaster happening right there. And somebody gets hurt and then it becomes a teacher, becomes a principal. But you can't hide behind the parents all the time because we're helping to make sure that our three parents are doing what they're supposed to be doing by helping us with the duty that's owed. Yes.
So if the parents make a mistake, are we held liable? Because they're,
If it's foreseeable, that the mistake, if it's a foreseeable mistake, and you
Well,
have made a...
anything, I guess, if we thought it up, could be foreseeable.
No, they don't go that far, I think. It's not just in the realm of
Had to be
that I could
foreseeable
actually
to
not be here right
other
now.
people too.
I could be a true alien, this is a projection. But it deals with the reasonableness of it, and the foreseeability of it. So no, they won't just do everything in the world. But if you've got parents who are chaperoning and you don't do specific things with them to help them protect the students, there's always a possibility.
I'm in music education.
Yes.
And I have performance ensembles.
Yes.
Let's just say one of my ensembles was to be 100 people large. Does that simply just increase the amount of duty that I have? I guess my second question would be, I don't think that there's a law as to X number of students you need, X number of teachers, because I know that there are one teacher to 100 kids before, especially in performance.
It depends on the context of it. If you've got 100 students that are out at a seashore, and there's rip tides and rocky prominences that they can go behind and get lost and get hurt, then you got a real problem with it. You could have 100 students who are in a confined space doing the same things that you can see them. Yeah, so that is, it's what do you do during those times? That's really the key. Other questions about negligence before we move on? How many people still want to teach?
I was on the
Best decision I ever made was to become an educator. My wife was a teacher, she became an attorney. She quit to go back to teaching. Her firm offered her 50% pay raise if she would stay. She was good. She said no. So she went back to teach second and third graders in a very high poverty area. Solely because, pardon?
Bless her heart.
Yes, yes. Solely because it was more fulfilling for her. It was more fulfilling for her. Didn't fill the pockets as much, but it was more fulfilling in the ways that really matter. Okay, no questions on negligence? Pretty secure with this? Know what to do in your classrooms tomorrow?
What about when you add in, like, I'm vocational, so when you add in, like, live animals? And that's something you can't really prepare for.
Yeah, actually you can.
I mean,
You got to take reasonable steps with it. If you're bringing in horses or cows, what are those horses and cows? What could they possibly do?
okay.
Kick and bite. So what do you have to do with that right away? You give them
With the
instructions on
horses.
how to approach them, how many students can be near them. I was an assistant principal. This was in Southern California, so we had no interior halls. And it was all pods. So I'm making my trip, my ongoing trip, and I turn and go past the fifth grade pod, and there's pretty good, about 1,000 students in this school. Turned and I see a crowd of students. Let me give you a piece of advice here, and this is the law. It is a law. No good comes from a crowd of students. No good ever comes from a crowd of students. When you see a crowd, if you see a crowd of students, go to it. It should draw you in. Should draw you in. So and I'm a little bit taller than most of the fifth graders, so I can look and see what's going on here. And there was a student, and I'm going to get up close to you, has an acetylene torch, and they're studying rocks. Gloved, goggles, torch right here. This is my next closest student. I've got this acetylene torch. You know, whatever the sound you make. Acetylene torch got it going. Students are just enraptured by it. I looked at that. I looked around. Where's my teacher? Where's my teacher? Son, he was in heaven. He loved the stuff he did. We'll call him Garth. Mr. Garth, turn it off now. I didn't stop the lesson and say you can't do the lesson, but what did I need to do that a reasonable thinking person should have done? And how do you define adequate supervision in that case? Because you have an increased risk of harm, don't you? Is it foreseeable that if you have an acetylene torch going and students are this close to it, is it foreseeable that somebody could be injured? Achoo! Yeah.
Ow. My eyebrow.
So what did I have him do? Yes.
These are fifth graders?
Fifth graders.
Isn't that a acetylene torch?
Acetylene torch. As long as it was handled properly, I didn't have a problem with it. I didn't. If it made instructional sense, they were first graders know they can't hold of it. Fifth graders, if they're trained properly. But what was the first thing I had to set up? I'd already ascertained that it was part of the lesson. It wasn't just some fun. It was part of the
A
unit.
barrier?
Yeah, a very distance. Just basic, simple stuff that is so easy for us to grasp. Just moving back. Safety. That's a safety. Okay. Did I answer a question, or was I just kind of enjoying myself?
I was enjoying myself, I didn't notice.
Let's take a look at, no other questions on negligence? Okay. The next one is edisharmony.com. I do this one for secondary. I don't do it for elementary. Why?
I thought it was Ed is Harmony.
Oh, Ed is Harmony, no, it's
So you find a
edisharmony.com.
newspaper clipping.
Yeah, so that you don't end up in a newspaper clipping. That's what I tell my Ed Law students. I feel successful when I don't see you in the paper. And I'm using you as one of the examples. So, edisharmony.com. For secondary, what am I talking about there? What's the caution that I'm raising? Schools are not happy hunting grounds for finding mates. But it's true. Read the stuff that goes on, it happens. I don't know how many times I've had to deal with situations with students who are crossing the line. One of the problems that comes in is there's 6 years difference between myself and my wife. So I could have taken her to my senior prom when she was in 6th grade, which probably would not have been appropriate. So when we have interns and teachers who are 22 years old, 23 years old, and are working with students who are 17 and 18, it happens. It happens. So we need to be clear of our boundaries, what our boundaries are. It typically deals, sometimes it's really not a sexual abuse, but boundaries. We have a situation where an intern got a phone call, former chair of the department, an associate chair, I deal with these kinds of things, that had where an intern had gone up into the bedroom when the parents were not there of one of his students to help tutor. There was no showing that anything wrong occurred, but what about how it looks? Inappropriate, yes, inappropriate. As professionals, professionals set up boundaries. We need to make sure we've got our boundaries set up with this. Our boundaries are set up. The other piece that's coming in as far as the electronic part, using the edisharmony.com, are the use of websites. I have no face and I have no space. I've never twitted, I've never been tweeted. Do I use those properly? Okay. But that's just me. That's just me. I understand that I am not the norm. So if you are going to have a life of social media where you're out there, you carry the responsibility and the burden. If you want a private life, you carry the burden of ensuring that you keep it private. The more people you bring into your life through social media, typically now it's the biggest challenge, the greater the chances of there being misunderstandings. I don't recommend ranking students. It could possibly be just fine. I think the way in which we treat students, once again, it's these kinds of boundaries that are set up. I read too many cases, I read lots and lots of cases, too many cases, where misunderstandings occur, or the internet now is used for what's called grooming. Grooming students. We see this in issues of sexual abuse of students, of how they're groomed by various actions. The internet now is being used as one of these grooming kinds of tools. So just be careful when you're dealing with, when they want to friend you, you want to friend them. It's once again, you start friending all the students, taking your wallet, you're walking away. You're walking away. Because nobody's going to protect this better than you. No one will protect this better than you. So you truly be careful with that. I had a situation that occurred in one of our programs. I got a phone call from a principal who was very angry, very angry. And this principal I did not know. And so she relayed the story to me. That she took one of our graduate students, considered the person persona non grata. Persona non grata means you're not allowed. If a government says you're persona non grata, you can't come into the country. If a principal says you're persona non grata, you can't come into the school. If the university says you're persona non grata, you cannot come into the university. So we had an intern we had a graduate student who was going into the school as part of his or her work. The principal called and she explained to me why she did it and wanted me to know so I could take whatever action I thought was appropriate. The student, prior to going to this school, put on Facebook. I'm going to X school this morning. I hope that the kindergartners do not stick me with their dirty needles. What was she saying? Particularly knowing this particular school district, I'm not going to name. Dirty needles, drugs. School was in a low socioeconomic area, had a reputation of lots and lots of drugs, and the students were involved with drugs. So put this up thinking that this kind of a funny thing. I tell, the idea is I need to let everybody know what I'm doing every minute of the day. She went in, she took a shower, he did, one of the two. Sex is indeterminate at this point. So then the person then came out and said, you know what, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. She deleted it. In the interim, a student found it on the Facebook page, showed it to the mother. The mother called the superintendent. Superintendent called the principal. Principal called me. Said the teacher is persona non grata for the aspersions she cast against her entire school. So we do not want her here. We do not want her here. So I contacted the student and said, you are not allowed to go to any of the schools until you come see me. So it got down to what was I going to do? So I took a look at it, am I going to dismiss her? And what kind of action am I going to take? And it really came down to, did she realize what she did? Because if she didn't realize the boundary that she crossed as a professional, then I was going to take action. She knew. She said, it was dumb. It was a thoughtless thing to do. I should not have made these comments. I should not have made these comments. I was a guest. I was going to be a guest at that school. So what we ended up doing with that, I just gave her a letter of admonishment, which was put in her file. You see more and more of these things occurring just by paying attention to the press. These things are occurring more and more. Teachers are getting in trouble for the things that they say. In some cases, the community says, oh, this is great. Other teachers, great, good job, good job. But what about the employer? What about the employer? The things that you put out there on your website, employers now, they look and look, they look, they look. And the things that you think maybe are for your friends. In those moments where you look drunk, wasted, those embarrassing moments that you would not want grandma to see. But if we put them out on the web and they're found, we've done lots of hiring. It's easier for me to say no to a person than it is to say yes and then hire him. I'd have 130 applications for one position. I said no an awful lot. So those things, those are the kinds of things that you do, that becomes a part, and this is a challenge that you have. I didn't have that challenge when I started. Other challenges, but not that one. Questions about the electronic world that we live in?
I have class, but I just want to get
Oh, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
I had my very first student friend request yesterday.
Very first student what?
Friend request.
Oh, friend request. Yeah, what are you gonna do? Don't tell me.
No, she did it in class. They had a work period, and I was subbing for my cooperating teacher. She's one of my cooperating teacher's kids, and I was like, "Why are you on Facebook during work period?"
Yeah.
And two, no.
Yeah.
I love her. She's an awesome girl. Though.
And that's the tough part. I get those from students from time to time, not as much as what you would. Consistently said no. Every single time. That way I'm not treating anybody differently. It's not about, oh, I like you, but I don't like you, but I like you, and I like you, but I don't like you. So I'm no friend to anyone. Basically, it's a stance I take. Yes,
What
sir.
about former students?
Former students. Are they former students? Are they students
Let's
who
say not
had
in school anymore.
not in school anymore? And how
Not
long,
in the school anymore,
and
so.
how long have they left the school? 2 days, 3 days, a month?
They,
a summer, 4 years, 5 years?
any of the above graduated.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna be, I don't do that.
The closer you make these relationships to when they just left the school, what happens with it, if it's viewed that somehow that there's sexual misconduct, and they back, it's called proximity in time to when you were the teacher, there's special charges that are brought because it's done under color of state authority, which means that you have a powerful position over, when you do, over students. So it was that powerful position you used to further your own lascivious means, or not. So, but this is what happens when.
Wait, I'm talking on Facebook, not,
And for me, it's any of it. As soon as you start to say, I'm no longer your teacher, I'm going to be your friend, you change the relationship. So the further out it is from the time when you were the teacher to when you become the friend, the better off you are, very honestly. It's just that, it's that distance with it, that you're no longer their teacher with it. So just be careful with that stuff. And I know that the world is changing around me. Just be careful with it. Questions about electronics? Let's think.
I don't really
Yes.
know how to phrase this question.
Okay.
So I'm an English major. I teach language arts in 8th grade, and I'm also a writer. And I've been thinking a lot about publishing and self-publishing on blogs and things like that, and how much I need to censor what I write. And, you know, it's not necessarily including classroom situations or
Yeah.
anything like that in my writing,
Yeah.
but just like how much do I censor
Yeah.
under my name or like,
Yeah.
you know?
And there is some self-censure that goes on with that. And it's the more provocative your writing becomes, the more protection you're going to want to have in some ways with it. There's a case that came out recently where a teacher took place in California. The teacher advertised on Craigslist, advertised for a date on Craigslist, advertised for Craigslist for a date on the adults only section. And it was sexually, I'm not going to read it to you, but it was truly, truly sexually explicit about what the
Or likes and dislikes.
yeah, or acts. Okay, very, very explicit. Student found it. Mother found it, called the police, it was called the school district. The person then was brought up for charges and was dismissed for immorality. Court case was whether or not this was an immoral act. And this is where I talk about the concept of exemplar, this issue of how the person was portraying himself out there in public.
Well, this is fair.
Yeah, and it's probably not, but it is the way of the world.
Normal people must advertise themselves sexually on Craigslist and.
Yep, and I think that's absolutely true. But the issue is, we're not the average people. You can't get around it. Truly, you cannot get
I
around
am
it.
pretty extraordinary.
You are exemplars in your health or higher standard of conduct, not the average person is not. And that truly is just how it is. If we don't recognize that, then that's when we start to make some of the decisions that are not real good decisions, that end up with me teaching about you in the school law class. Questions about that? I want to shift to religion. We use a little bit of religion right now. We walk in, I'll bow your head and we'll pray together over this. Can I do that? Why? Why can't I?
Public university.
Okay, all those things, but what is it specific? All those things are correct. What part of the First Amendment? Establishment clause, the establishment clause. So the establishment clause is set up to, the concept of separation of church and state is not found in the Constitution. Can you pray in class? Can you pray as a teacher in class?
Yes.
How can you pray in class?
Silently.
Let me give you an example.
You can do it in a way in which you're not telling.
What I'd like for you to do is open your books, turn to page 32, and I'll give you some questions in just a moment, please. Quadratic equations, let's get started. Let's get happy with this. So, did I pray? Did I come up with a list to stop at the store? You know, the electricity, we had no food anymore. Did you tell what I was doing? That's how we can pray. Can students pray? Did I hear a yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Did I hear an amen?
Yes. Yes, they can. And they can pray to a greater degree than what we can. What they can't do, they can't walk up and down the aisle swinging incense and sacrificing. That they cannot do. But they can pray. They can get together at lunchtime. They can sit at a table, and they can have a prayer over the food. That they can do. We should not intervene with that, and we must not, because to do that violates the Establishment Clause. Establishment Clause is 3 Testament. Yes, sir.
You intervene with it anyways, if it's not disrupting class.
Well, because what happens with it, most of the time it doesn't occur, but I come across too many situations where it does occur. Where students are told, no, you cannot pray in the cafeteria. It does, those are things that do occur. But if we build the schema that says that students have the ability to have a free exercise of religion, and as long as they're not disrupting the school or the class, then they have that ability to pray. And they do it all the time. They'll sit quietly, they're waiting to see. Oh, dear merciful Lord. A little flu bug, we were going to have a math test today. A little flu bug. Oh, please, merciful Lord. No problem with that. They can do that. You may be doing that about the flu bug for George. Yes.
So what if you, the teacher, you belong to a particular faith that requires you as a devout, member of that religion to perform